podcast. What's on my mind? As of late, it is pretty interesting to see the timeless classic return. Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? You may have, and probably have seen, these arguments lately of the fights that video game violence creates real-life violence as they fight against it. But to be simple, I'd just like to point out some other things that have always existed, or have influenced us far before video games. Number one, we literally had 2 entire world wars before video games. Doesn't that count as violence? Number 2, literally. Well, not literally, a number 2. Might as well be, though. Is horror movies. Literally an entire genre of existence dedicated to murder, attack, pain, misfortune, sorrow, suffering. Now, a better argument would be, instead of this causes violence, so black and white, would say that through many, and all of these things really combined together, we are desensitized against whatever topic, in this case violence. In the same way, though, people are indoctrinated with fake versions of love and what to expect from life when they watch sitcoms and fairy tale animes. But if we're going to talk about what encourages violence, what about sports? And we bet on the victor of these pointless, futile human rituals. Boxing, football, MMA, martial arts, hockey. Hey, what about Rochambeau? A sport, literally, where who can take more kicks to the groin and still be standing. Violence doesn't cause violence, but violence supports violence, because you can't beat violence except for what? With violence, it seems? I mean, otherwise it takes upwards of millions of people marching and rallying together, which people are too afraid nowadays to stand up for any cause in that fashion. Afraid of being arrested and whatnot. You know, they're not dedicated enough to fight for anything they believe in anyway. They just silently cry and complain behind a keyboard or a computer or a camera. Personally, most things don't directly bother me, but I like to bring awareness that there are many ways of existing and many things going on, and things aren't as black and white or as bullshit, agenda-oriented as people make them out to be. So video games cause violence? Cause. One would theorize that violent people would enjoy violent video games. Not non-violent people are inspired by violent video games to become something contrary to their character. The same ridiculous assertions are made on marijuana. Does marijuana make you lazy? Absolutely not. Marijuana increases whatever you already are. If you're lazy, you'll be more lazy and you'll be comfortable with that. Marijuana makes you comfortable. But if you're a hard worker, you'll continue to be a hard worker. An excellent quote from John Cusack in the film, it was 2006, I believe, called High Fidelity. Excellent movie, you should watch it if you're a lover of music. He says, in the very beginning of the film, did I listen to pop music because I was sad? Or was I sad because I listened to pop music? This is an ancient philosophical debate. Does life depict art? I mean, does life imitate art? Or does art imitate life? But personally, I myself live in a very rigid and structured world. And I don't allow myself excuses, so I don't allow other people excuses. If you do something, you do it because you chose to, no matter how much you were influenced. And even most of those influences, alcohol, heroin, whatever you do, were something that to some percentage you chose to engage in. Even if you had a gun pointed to your head and someone said, here, inject this, you have the option of dying. Everything is somewhat your fault, so don't blame someone else for choices that you engage in. Oh, you didn't like the alternative road. Doesn't matter. Video games do not create violence. Violent people might create violent video games. Or it would be more logical to think that a violent digital landscape would be an extremely safe alternative to, like, a ritual room for spiritualists to channel out things that are inappropriate to do in real life, and are perfectly therapeutic to release through a digital medium. But if we're going to try to ban video games for imaginary creation of violence, which can only be so far true as to educate and inform and introduce a person to ideas that they might not have had prior. That's the closest to a truth you'll find on that. Then we need to ban all sports, because competition creates violence. It creates aggression. We need to ban education because we're learning about our violent history, our past. And that's going to influence how we think in the future. We need to ban books because books will educate you or inform you, whether in fantasy or in historical accurate context, that violent things happen. But, you know, now we get to go on the killing spree, and we can blame the book, and we can blame the video game, and, you know, everybody always has to have something to blame other than themselves. Satan made me do it. Did he? Or did you just need a reason to allow yourself to make it okay for whatever it is that you already had inside you? Potential. You have infinite potential to do whatever you want. You just need an excuse, like love. Love is with you always, 100%, all the time. You just look for excuses and reasons to channel it, to bring it out, to allow yourself to experience it. Oh, I refuse to be loved. That's another thing people do, unless it comes in this particular manner. But when it comes in this particular manner, they allow themselves to have that experience. You're responsible for you, not a video game. If we're going to ban random nonsense that allegedly causes violence, we need to ban bingo too. We need to ban coupons and Black Fridays, all sports and competitions. I mean, if you just really think about it, it's actually pretty crazy to blame anything for you, to blame video games for violence, to blame fantasy for you doing something in reality that you didn't know the difference. And while it is true that the brain really doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality, you also have the choice, to choose what you tune into, what movies you allow yourself to watch, what types of things you allow yourself to do. We are the sum of the many stories we tell ourselves. What we do on a daily basis defines us. The Christians protect themselves from this and saying, see no, hear no, speak no evil. So if it is something bad, you're supposed to tune it out. You have the option of how often you expose yourself to poisons and toxins. And video games or movies or any of these things are no different. If the sum of the stories you tell yourself, your subconscious, if the majority, if the bigger weight of those things are something negative or angry or what have you, it makes sense that you would be influenced to be more negative than positive, because the sum of the stories you tell yourself are negative. So you experience negative things, and you see the world in a negative way, and you act in a negative way. That is the majority of what you tell yourself. It is not who you are, and it is not the stimulus's problem. You chose to be stimulated by these things, and to give it a response. Were you to do the same thing with joyous things, you'd be much happier. This is the whole point in meditation. This is the whole point in prayer. This is the whole point in any religious doctrine whatsoever, that you also take the time, that you make the time to take the time to be amongst yourself, to filter out the good and the bad, to weigh thoughts in your head before making a decision, and to discipline yourself and remind yourself of the goodness, of the dedications and paths and interests of where you want to go. Your life is not dictated by a video game. It's preposterous and absurd. The same argument was made about movies with drugs in them, and there was a time when H.J. Anslinger was doing his thing, trying to ban marijuana and calling it a gateway to drugs such as heroin, and for a short time had everyone convinced on the matter. But I've smoked marijuana and I've done none of these other drugs. You can't allow the power of suggestion to have so much place in your life. At the end of the day, and really throughout the entire day, should you stop and think and act instead of react to stimulus responses and suggestions, you ultimately, as my grandmother would say, you are the captain of your own ship. So don't come up with excuses. You'll always be unhappy because you'll always find more excuses to be unhappy. Everybody else's fault. Everybody else's reason. Oh, I don't get along with people. Who said I don't get along with people? It's not people. People will come in many shapes and sizes. If I do better on my own, I do better on my own. It has nothing to do with, even if I could be emotional and try to blame, to shift blame and focus, to project my feelings onto another, to say, hey, this guy is the reason I feel such and such, think such and such, and do such and such. Live your life well, but don't blame other people for it. These are my thoughts on video game violence, random and sporadically put it in here and playing around with the clip button. But yeah, Kevin Chaos, peace be with you.